Have you ever met someone for the first time and within minutes thought, I don't know why, but I trust this person? You haven't seen their resume. You don't know their history. You don't even know if they're telling you the truth. And yet, something about them makes you feel safe. Now here's the strange part. People who create this feeling aren't necessarily the smartest, funniest, or most successful people in the room. Sometimes they barely say anything. So what are they doing differently? The answer isn't one magical personality trait. It's a collection of tiny psychological signals your brain notices before you consciously realize you're noticing them. And once you understand those signals, you'll start seeing them everywhere. You'll also understand why certain people can walk into a room full of strangers and somehow make everyone comfortable within minutes. The first secret is surprisingly simple. Trusted people don't make you work to understand where you stand with them. Think about someone who constantly changes their personality depending on who they're talking to. They're charming with one person, cold with another, overly agreeable with someone else, and completely different around their friends. Even if you can't explain why, something feels off. Your brain is constantly looking for consistency, because consistency creates predictability, and predictability creates safety. This is why someone who behaves roughly the same way with a waiter, a friend, a stranger, and a coworker often feels more trustworthy. Not because they're perfect, because you don't have to constantly guess which version of them you're going to get. But there's another signal your brain pays even more attention to, and it has almost nothing to do with what someone says. It's whether they seem genuinely interested in you. Imagine you're talking to someone, and while you're speaking, they keep looking around the room. Their phone is sitting on the table. Their eyes keep moving. They interrupt you before you've finished. Now compare that with someone who simply listens. They don't rush to tell you their own story. They ask a small follow-up question. They remember what you just said. Suddenly you feel important. And here's the psychological trick. People often trust those who make them feel understood more than those who try to impress them. That's because being understood feels like being accepted, and being accepted lowers our defenses. This is why one of the most powerful things a trustworthy person can do is something incredibly ordinary. Listen, but not fake listening, not waiting for your turn to talk, actually listening. There's another fascinating behavior that makes people trust someone almost instantly. They don't seem desperate to be liked. Think about the difference between confidence and approval seeking. Someone walks into a room and immediately tries to prove how impressive they are. They mention their achievements, they name drop, they constantly make jokes, they need everyone to react positively. At first, it might look confident, but your brain may quietly interpret it as insecurity. Now imagine someone equally capable who doesn't need to announce it. They're comfortable admitting, I don't know. They're comfortable being corrected. They're comfortable letting someone else have the spotlight. That creates a completely different impression. Because confidence doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes confidence looks like not needing to dominate. And this leads to one of the most overlooked traits of highly trusted people. They can admit small mistakes. Imagine someone says, I actually got that wrong. That's it. No complicated excuse. No blaming someone else. No attempt to rewrite what happened. Just a simple acknowledgement. That tiny moment can increase trust because it tells your brain something important. This person isn't trying to control my perception of them. And ironically, admitting a small weakness can make someone appear more credible, because perfection is suspicious. If someone never makes mistakes, never gets embarrassed, never changes their mind, and always has an explanation, you may eventually wonder what they're hiding. No, but someone who can say, yeah, that was my mistake, feels human. And humans are easier to trust when they don't seem to be performing. Now let's go deeper. There's a reason some people make you feel comfortable almost immediately. It's called emotional regulation. You probably know someone who enters a room carrying enormous emotional energy. They're angry, they're nervous, they're constantly reacting, their mood changes every few minutes, and suddenly everyone around them has to adjust. Now think about the opposite kind of person. They're calm, not emotionless, not robotic, just steady. When something goes wrong, they don't immediately explode. When someone disagrees with them, they don't treat it like an attack. When there's an awkward silence, they don't panic and fill it with meaningless words. Their calmness sends a powerful signal. Nothing dangerous is happening here. And your nervous system notices. This is one reason emotionally stable people can feel trustworthy before you've even learned much about them. But there's something even more interesting. Trusted people don't always agree with you. In fact, constantly agreeing can sometimes reduce trust. Imagine you tell a friend, I think I should quit my job tomorrow, and they immediately say, absolutely, you're right. You might feel supported, but what if they say, I understand why you feel that way, but can I tell you what worries me about it? that response may actually create more trust, because they're not simply trying to keep you happy. They're willing to tell you something you might not want to hear. This is the difference between approval and honesty. A person who agrees with everything you say may be trying to win your approval. A person who respectfully disagrees may be showing that their relationship with you is more important than getting a positive reaction from you. And that's powerful, because trust isn't built when someone always tells you what you want to hear. It's built when you believe they'll tell you what they genuinely think. There's also a tiny social behavior that trusted people often do without thinking about it. They give people psychological space. They don't force intimacy. They don't ask deeply personal questions 5 minutes after meeting you. They don't demand immediate friendship. They allow relationships to develop naturally. And that matters because trust grows when people feel they still have control. If someone constantly pushes for your attention, your secrets, your time, or your approval, your brain may start creating distance. But when someone gives you room to choose, you feel safer around them. Think about a salesperson. The worst ones follow you around. The best ones often say something like, "Take your time, if you need anything, I'm right here." Suddenly, you feel less pressure. And when pressure disappears, trust has room to grow. Now here's a behavior that might surprise you. People who are trusted easily often don't gossip as much as you might expect. Because when someone tells you someone else's secret, your brain immediately asks a question. If they're willing to tell me other people's private information, what will they say about me when I'm gone? Gossip can create temporary connection, but discretion creates long-term trust. You feel safer with someone when you know they don't need to turn every private conversation into entertainment. And that brings us to one of the strongest trust signals of all. They behave well when there's nothing to gain. Watch how someone treats a person who can't help them. A cashier, a server, a stranger, a new employee, someone they don't need anything from. This is where character becomes visible. Because when there's a reward for being nice, kindness doesn't tell you much. But when there's no audience, no advantage, and no status attached to the interaction, behavior becomes much more revealing. Your brain understands this intuitively. You may not consciously analyze it, but you notice. And sometimes, one tiny interaction tells you more about someone than an hour of conversation. There's another reason certain people feel trustworthy. Their words and actions match. They say they'll call. They call. They say they'll be there. They show up. They promise something. They follow through. These may sound like ordinary behaviors, but repeated consistency creates something incredibly powerful. Evidence. Trust isn't just a feeling. It's your brain making a prediction. If I rely on this person, what are the chances they'll behave the way I expect? Every time someone keeps a promise, the prediction becomes stronger. Every time they break one, it becomes weaker. That's why trust can take months to build and seconds to damage. Your brain is constantly updating the model. And there's one final piece that ties everything together. People everyone trusts instantly usually aren't trying to create trust. They're creating safety. They don't walk into a room thinking, "How can I make everyone like me?" They communicate something much simpler through their behavior. You don't have to perform around me. You don't have to impress me. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to hide every mistake. You can just be yourself. And that's why the most trusted person in the room isn't always the loudest. It isn't always the most charismatic. It isn't always the person telling the best stories. Sometimes it's the quiet person who listens carefully, the person who keeps their word, the person who doesn't humiliate others to look intelligent, the person who can admit when they're wrong, the person who treats people with the same basic respect whether they're powerful or invisible. And once you notice these behaviors, you'll start seeing something fascinating. Trust rarely arrives through one giant moment. It arrives through dozens of tiny moments. A person remembers your name. They don't interrupt. They keep a promise. They don't expose a secret. They admit a mistake. They respect a boundary. They stay calm when things go wrong. And eventually, your brain reaches a conclusion without asking permission. This person is safe. That's the real psychology behind people everyone seems to trust. They don't manipulate your brain into trusting them. They give your brain enough consistent evidence that trust becomes the natural conclusion, and maybe that's the most important lesson of all. If you want people to trust you, don't focus on looking trustworthy. Focus on becoming predictable in the best possible way. Be the person whose words mean something. Be the person who listens when nobody is impressed. Be the person who stays kind when there's nothing to gain. Because in the end, people may forget your jokes. They may forget what you were wearing. They may even forget most of what you said. But they rarely forget how safe, respected, and understood they felt when they were around you. And sometimes that's the strongest reputation a person can ever build.